Well, it's not every day that you get to interview not just a Canadian, but an international hero on the podcast. Who are we here with today, Dave?
Yeah, so today we get the great privilege of introducing Rick Hansen to our viewers and hopefully to many more viewers. Rick, over 30 years ago, was the Canadian who did something unheard of in probably human history, well, guaranteed unheard of in human history. He got into his wheelchair and basically lapped the planet, did 40,000 plus kilometers in an effort to bring attention and recognition to disabilities, and specifically spinal cord disabilities. But more than that, he's also a human being who has won enough gold medals to pave the yellow brick road. He was a world-renowned athlete previous to doing that. And since then, he's had many more accomplishments, which we're going to be really excited to talk to him about.
And we really wanted to welcome you to the Crazy Damn Canadians podcast, Rick, because we're all UMBC alumni, University of Northern British Columbia. Dave and I studied up on campus there, and you received your honorary of Doctorate of Laws degree in 2008.
That's right. It's great to be able to connect with you guys. Thanks a lot, Scott and Dave, for your hospitality and going on this journey together. And there's lots of really amazing connections when we both come from the Cariboo, and then UMBC is an amazing campus, and they're doing great work for so many people locally and around the world.
Absolutely, and I want to actually give a shout out to your niece Alexis, because she's one of the many graduates of UMBC who helped make this podcast happen, and just a phenomenal human being. So thank you, Alexis.
She's great, yeah, and of course she's a teacher, and love the spirit of reaching out and helping people reach their best and continue to grow and evolve as human beings.
You got it. So as a Northern BC kid growing up in Williams Lake, it was on June 27th, 1973, that a very defining moment in your life occurred. Would you mind talking about this to our audience, about what happened that day near Williams Lake?
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's almost 50 years ago. I was at 15 and just graduating from grade 10. Me and a couple of basketball team buddies decided that we'd go on a trip of a lifetime once we graduated, and we'd go on a salmon fishing and trout fishing trip through the Chilcotin and into the Bella Coola Valley. We would spend probably about 10 days and come back in time for the Williams Lake Stampede. What an amazing kind of dream trip for 15-year-olds. And we were hitchhiking back from the last part of the trip, got a ride in the back of a pickup truck. Coincidentally, it was the fellow and his girlfriend who we stopped to help them change their flat tire in the middle of the night down in the Bella Coola Valley, and really saved them from a tough bind. And they were going to drive right by us when we were hitchhiking, but they realized that that we were two of the three kids who had stopped to help them, and so they stopped to help us, and we got to the back of the truck, and about 4 hours later, on a rough gravel washboard turn, and he lost control and the truck flipped and rolled. My friend was thrown clear. He was on the high side of the roll, and I was on the inside of the roll, and trapped by a whole bunch of garbage and and equipment in the back of the truck, and broke my back. And a few hours later, I was in the hospital in Williams Lake, and family around me. The doctor comes in and tells me that I've broken my back, damaged my spinal cord, and never walk again.
So when you had the accident and you ended up down in Vancouver and you went through extensive rehabilitation, the next thing that kind of we saw as being a defining moment in your life was coming back to Williams Lake. And when you arrived in Williams Lake, you discovered that it wasn't very accessible. Can you tell us a little bit about how that influenced you and affected what you did next?
And there were two ongoing battles for me after I had my injury. The first was the battle inside my mind. That was the biggest one raging, which was the lack of awareness or understanding or perspective about disability. I had a lot of traditional handicaps, stereotypes in my mind that if you had a disability, that you were somebody to be pitied, or was limited opportunity. And I had no point of reference because I didn't know anybody really who lived with a disability. So I really thought my life was over. and I was really struggling just to hang on to hope, and struggling to get pinpricks of light, that would create a new level of color and texture about the possible life I could still live. And there was no information age back then. It was all word of mouth, and just people talking, and starting to kind of understand, just what this meant to me. And so that personal journey of my attitude and my perspective about the situation and hope for the possibilities in the future. And then going back home, realizing the fact that my home, my school, the community was completely inaccessible, and everything was going to be a struggle. And so I had that second level of handicap to deal with. And fortunately, though, I was able to, in the rehab center, work really, really hard to supplement, wheeling in the chair to being able to sort of hop on crutches and braces. So in the short term, I was able to, with great effort, navigate through some of the inaccessible barriers, but at a tremendous cost. And, ultimately, those were the two, in many ways, lessons and journeys for me to start to understand just how big a deal dealing with accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities would be in Canada and, of course, around the world.
And so you graduated high school, Williams Lake, and enrolled in UBC. And only a few years later, you're the first person with a disability to graduate with a physical education degree there. And it was during this time that you met a lot of influential and inspiring people, including a young gentleman, Terry Fox. And with Terry Fox, you actually came up to Prince George in 1979, September 1979, with Terry and his best friend Doug, and you competed in the Prince George to Boston Marathon, then called the Labor Day Classic. What was it like, just as a young kid, really, with Terry Fox, a good friend of yours, competing in that event and knowing it was that event that gave him the confidence to start the Marathon of Hope the next year in 1980?
None of that would have ever happened if it wasn't for my phys ed coach and teacher, Bob Redford from Williams Lake, Columnista High School at the time. And he was my coach and teacher, and he got me back into sport, made me realize that nowhere in the definition of an athlete does it say you have to use your legs in order to be one. That Paralympic sport existed. I loved basketball, loved lots of sports at that time. And so he also was the one who encouraged me to enroll at UBC and take physical education, even though I was rejected at the first year, and told to come down and take first year arts and science. And I was going to walk away from that opportunity and literally stay in Williams Lake and maybe think about some desk job and write off all those hopes and dreams. But he made me see it as a challenge and an opportunity to go down and convince them I was the right person and pick it up in year two. And thanks to Bob Redford, I ended up going down, got to UBC, ended up joining the Vancouver Cable Cars wheelchair basketball team, and then through a mentor named Stan Strong, decided that I could recruit others. And eventually I ran into Terry Fox, and Terry had just lost his leg to cancer, and he was struggling, wondering what his life would be like. He used to play basketball as well at Simon Fraser University, and he came out to our team, and he was inspired by Stan, by our team. And as part of that whole process, I think he realized that he could still do anything he wanted to. He just had to set his mind to it. He could be an athlete, he could be a good student, he could continue to make a difference and use some of his experiences in living with cancer, and maybe think about maybe trying something crazy or unique or challenging to make a difference. And he was inspired by a young man who did I believe it was the Boston Marathon and New York Marathon, as an amputee. And he thought, wow, if he can do that, maybe I can start doing that in my training as supplement. And eventually he decided to frame a dream of running across the country for cancer research. And one of the first, moments for him to really test his endurance, because he was going to try to set a 26-mile, 42-kilometer a day kind of pace on one leg. He wanted to do something that was getting up there, and that was the Prince George to Boston Marathon. And we were both there together, because I was doing my marathon training at that time as well. and we participated, and you know, it was an unbelievable experience. I came through and placed first in that race overall, and I was given the award to a trip to Boston, but I gave it back because I told them that it wasn't fair to compare someone in a wheelchair with someone running, and that the person who ran should have received it. Meanwhile, while all that was going on, everyone was shutting down the course, and there was mutterings going on, and they were trying to convince Terry who was the last runner, to actually, stop and quit because the race time limit was over. And Terry just looked at them in that classic look, and he said, "Not a chance. Come all this way. I've got this dream. Are you kidding?" And so he just kept giving her. And next thing you know, everybody came out to help join him and cheer him on as he finished that incredible iconic moment. And it was a real turning point for him, for sure. He truly built the confidence that, number one, he could physically do the journey, and number two, that what he was doing was incredibly inspirational, and it would make a difference if he actually put it together and had the right team behind him. So as a friend, I was blown away, inspired by him. Obviously, we hung out together, we trained together, roomed together, and he was inspired by me and our team, and I was inspired by him. And I feel blessed to have known him. He was an amazing Canadian, kind of guy you wouldn't really pick out of the crowd, but he had extraordinary determination, and he really wanted to pay it forward, and he did. Wow, what a legacy.
Well, there's definitely some very similar characteristics between Terry and you. And as the lead organizer of the Terry Fox Run in Prince George, I get to share a picture on the 3rd September Sunday every year of you and Terry Fox standing outside, which is Four Seasons Pool, downtown Prince George, 6th and Dominion. And there was just a couple of young kids, and nobody knew it at the time that these would be future national and world heroes that would inspire so many. And your foundations combined have raised over $1 billion for charity work. There's also another young individual from Prince George. His name is Jim Tyrion. You probably know about him. He walked across Canada despite having a hearing disability in 1990 from Newfoundland to British Columbia, and he's raised over $800,000 for the Terry Fox Foundation. Just another remarkable individual.
Yeah, it's incredible. And you never know where the ripples will flow once you decide to make your mark and go for it, because you connect with people, and they look at what you're doing and often say, well, if they can do it, so can I. And it's amazing to hear those stories, and of how someone like Jim was inspired by Terry, and then look at that all those years later. He's there helping keep Terry's dream alive, and thanks to millions of people around the world, cancer is actually being beaten, and more progress happens every day.
So from 1979 to 1984 in your life, you won 19 international wheelchair marathons and 3 world titles. You were basically on top of the world in any sport that you tried to compete at. We want to ask, is there a favorite competition memory that you would say stands out, or something that you could share from that time?
I mean, you can think about the victories, and they're all unique and special. But I think the greatest lesson in life for me was when I got my butt kicked 3 times in a row. After I was starting to think I was pretty good, and I was a world champion and hadn't been beaten, and I started to lose sight of what's required to stay on the curve, that competitive curve of excellence. I didn't take care of my equipment, and I came to races not fully prepared physically, mentally, and mechanically. And I lost in Montreal to a great Canadian named Mel Fitzgerald right at the finish line. I lost in Boston, which is largely a downhill course, start to finish, with a bit of wind behind you, to a really great American named Jim Knob, and he kind of just glided away from me on a downhill, and you can imagine how devastating that is to an athlete when there's not a thing you can do about it, as his chair just kind of rips down the course, and it doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in, he just disappears off in the sunset, and you can't catch him no matter what. and then I lost to another American named George Murray right at the finish line. And those three losses were probably the biggest turning point for me in my entire career and my life, because if you really want to set a goal, it doesn't matter who you are. Every single day, if you want to be your best, you bring it and you come prepared, no regrets, and ultimately you end up bringing your personal best, and hopefully it allows you to emerge to be able to cross the finish line and possibly win. But if you don't, at least you won't have that feeling I had when I lost those three, which is I had let myself down more than I was really beaten. And it was got me back on the track again, reinvigorated, reclaimed my world title in '84, and then helped bridge the gap in the transition from the athletic racing career and commitment to what would become the ultra marathon journey on the Man in Motion Tour.
So let's talk about that, Rick. The Man in Motion World Tour, which commenced on March 21st, 1985. You're an athlete, mid-20s, prime condition, and just to go over some statistics, 2 years, 2 months, 2 days was the duration. Over 40,000 kilometers wheeled around the world in 34 countries. An average of 85 kilometers wheeled a day. I think you said 27 million actual strokes in total, and $26 million raised. Can we talk about the crew for a second? Because I know all these statistics are important, but reading your story, your autobiography, the team you had in your corner, and I even want to mention your wife, Amanda, would you have been able to do it without them? What were those dynamics like when you were going through these 34 countries?
It was amazing. The fact that, you even had the ability to start on that first day was the greatest victory. And that was a tribute to, this amazing group of core people who rallied around me and the dream. And they played their role through incredible odds just to actually have the privilege of starting. There's so much self-doubt, skepticism, people who just couldn't understand that it was possible. Even the distance between, trying to over-plan everything until it was perfect versus just getting going and working it out as you go, knowing that there's going to be lots of mistakes and learnings, but you had to go because the window of opportunity was closing. And when I was literally at the stage, with a little ceremony of 200 well-wishers at Oak Ridge Mall on March 21st of '85, on that first morning, the guys were high-fiving themselves on this photo, on the side, lines, and there's the Premier and Betty and Rolly Fox, Terry's mom and dad, and they're giving me this little miniature statue of Terry at Thunder Bay as a source of inspiration. And I'm doing this speech and my left shoulder's aching because just a few months earlier I'd crashed and dislocated the shoulder, and I'm thinking how lucky I am just to be there, because Amanda, my physiotherapist, had actually treated the shoulder and gotten me to a place where I'm able to now still go, but I'm slightly uncertain as to whether I can make the distance because I'm structurally changed, and I've got so far to go, and we're not organized, we're tired, and I haven't even taken my first stroke yet, and my eyes were like kind of bugged out as I'm speaking, probably like deer in the headlights, thinking, what have I got myself into here? I'm a mess. And I think that sort of reality was just like into the deep end for all of us. We were underprepared, underfunded. After the first day on the road, I was injured. I ended up dealing with 70-kilometer-an-hour headwinds, 0 degrees, pouring rain, sleet. And, I had to bring Amanda back down as a physiotherapist. And all of this was just happening at once. And it was stroke by stroke, moment by moment. But at the end of the day, it was the team, that were there for me. And every time I faltered, some of them, one of them would step up. And when they couldn't, somebody else would come in and add new energy and bring wind into our sail to help us keep going.
I think that one of the important things in reading your book and your story for me was that you persevered with that, and perseverance is always the theme with any human being like you. All the people who've ever accomplished anything great comes down to that one characteristic, perseverance, just the inability to give up. And you definitely defined that as the sense you got, including some people maybe even going to the point of your friends calling you stubborn. And you got
Yeah.
that sense in the book that they were all like, just leave Rick alone. This guy is just never going to quit. But you did that with almost no attention around the world. Like, you did it knowing that you weren't even getting the attention. And
Yeah.
when we first noticed it, and I want to share this with you as someone who grew up watching you do that, but it was when you hit the Great Wall of China. And all of a sudden, my parents put the TV on. They're like, everybody has to come watch this. And we saw this guy. And at that point in my life, the only person I'd ever known of that could be defined as a hero in Canada was my parents gave me a little book on Terry Fox. And it was like a book that, you know, it was only maybe 30, 40 pages, but it was his story. And I remember reading it and crying because I felt so sad that he wasn't alive. But that's when I went, okay, that's a hero. And my parents said, yeah, that's a hero. And that's why they gave me the book. And then we saw you on the Great Wall of China. And my parents said, this guy's wheeling around the world. And right then I went, well, that's a hero. That's a new hero. And for me as a kid, from that point forward, our whole family became obsessed with paying attention to every little bit of info we could get as you did the journey. And that was huge for us and huge for me. And that's why I've grown up knowing your story and saying clearly, definitively, you're an icon and the person that people should try to emulate when it comes to persevering and doing good. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how did you not give up when you didn't have people paying attention and supporting? What was going on in your head?
Great question. And I think there's no magic formula, but I think the first piece is that you really have to have a purpose. You really have to have a sense of why it is you're doing it. And for me, it was clearly the manifestation of all the battles I'd faced in my mind about my own attitude, about my disability. It was about all the people who had looked at me differently, or my friends or my colleagues who had disabilities. For me, it was also about the physical barriers that I'd faced everywhere I went. You know, the double handicap. It was they didn't have to be there. And if they were gone, imagine the potential inside everyone to be equal contributing citizens and just live a whole life without having to be cured. And of course there was that secondary goal of, you know, also wanting to help cure paralysis one day so someone didn't have to go through that. But the primary goal was to really see that and to use the tour as the example of the removal of barriers of human potential inside everyone. And so what I would do is I would struggle to look for the examples of that. So you had the vision and the purpose, which gives you a resilient strength. And then the second thing is there's always a gap between the dream and reality. And boy, there was a huge gap in a lot of the tour part, as you alluded to. But there's always something every day that you can see that is an example of the goodness of what you're doing and how it's translating into having a positive impact on someone. It could be someone on the street smiling, or in Poland there was a small crowd in a local community where a young man on a piece of plywood with skateboard wheels with a pillow on the plywood pushing himself along the road to catch up to me at an event, and through a translator, streaming tears of joy saying, "Thank you. It's the first time in my life that my family and community have looked at me with ability, and keep going. You're making a difference." And those moments, they stick to you. And as even though there's no marching bands and big crowds and and dollars coming in to raise for the other side of the agenda, it was those little moments that you look for. And then every once in a while, when none of that even seems to be available because you're so in the dumps, then yeah, there are times when you do just have to either suck it up and just go, because you know that it will appear the next day, or when you're wanting to quit, because we all do get to those points where we do want to quit, that you gotta look for it. you got to look for it beyond yourself. And for me, luckily, that's when the team was there. Whether it was, again, my wife Amanda, who would talk me out of a limb of bailing and saying, like, just around the corner, Rick, just around the corner, it's there. Like, don't give up, man. I mean, you've come so far. You've got to have faith. And sure enough, the day or two later, there's something amazing that I couldn't see, and she infused that in me. And if I didn't have her on the road as a team member, there's just no way it would have happened. I would have caved. And so I think it's a combination of all of it. Real purpose, that resiliency and guts, and then the looking for inspiration, and then eventually needing encouragement and support during your darkest times and being open to it.
I think I remember in the book you discussed that hitting the Great Wall of China was one of your goals when you set out. You said you wanted to have a picture on the Great Wall of China. How did that work out?
That was unreal. Like I was, of course we didn't have a lot of information, National Geographic photos, and you could see, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome. You can see that wall with that, the cobblestone kind of surface, and you can get, yeah, it looks steep, but yeah, we can get there and get to one of the highest points, and that would be like a symbol for the whole tour. And so that was the dream. And as we came up to the wall, there we were, and we arrived in this little group there, cameras and kids with disabilities and the public, and everybody was like highly charged with this anticipation. But I didn't realize just how symbolic the wall was, to the Chinese culture of being able to be on the wall. It was like almost like a rite of passage. It had a real sense of potency to it, and the idea of a person with a disability in China, where people with disabilities were considered to be wards of state, shut-ins, limited ability, and in many ways a burden. The idea of someone in a wheelchair getting up onto and to the top of the wall and climb the wall was huge. And so I wheeled up there and was getting ready to go, and we were taking a little break in our motorhome, little van, and Amanda said, it's time to go. And I came around the corner and I looked and I went, just as we stopped to park with the van, and I saw that there were these stairs going up from the road up onto the wall. And they were a huge flight of stairs. I went, where's the ramp?
Yeah.
Like, just hadn't thought that,
Yeah.
that there wouldn't be a ramp. And so I was, in that little van, frozen with fear. And Amanda says, it's time to go. And I go, like, I'm not going out there. I can't. She goes, what do you mean? Well, this is the only time in the entire tour that I won't be able to do the complete wheeling. And she, there's stairs there. And she said, Rick, look at that. There's all these people waiting for you. And she said, the Great Wall is like a symbol, isn't it? It's a symbolic summit and representing all that the tour has been, will be. And I go, yeah. And she said, well, we've carried you every step of the way as your team. So let us carry you up those stairs. You do the wheeling up to the top of the wall there, and let that be the whole symbolic moment of the Great Wall. And I go, and then she goes, get over yourself and get out there, man. Like, and I went, okay, let's do it. I got it. Reframe, get perspective, get your ego out of the way, and let it unfold. And it unfolded beautifully. And I have that photo, of me on the top of the wall, and it's I've got it at home, and it's a great, for me, a reminder, that there are no walls too big in life that can't be climbed. But the photo of me and my team on the wall is the most powerful symbol. It's like, how can you properly describe how grateful and proud and fortunate I feel to have had that group of people who really were out there with me every single day. They gave up their careers to work in the background to help me bring it, and they didn't ask for anything in return. And they represented thousands of people around the world who did that as well in big and small ways. And yeah, it was the greatest symbol of the whole tour. And to have like my cousin Lee to have my coach, Tim Frick, to have my physiotherapist, Amanda, who became my wife, to have Nancy Thompson, who's our team manager, to have Don Alder, who was in the back of the pickup truck with me, who was, when on my basketball team in Williams Lake, and, an aspiring musician who gave up his career. And, he was, the guy who was thrown clear. And there he was, helping, that pivotal moment manifest into something good on the Man of Motion tour. Yeah, and so many other stories that I'm still even just learning about today when people call in or send me notes about how they were connected and what they did. And it truly is a testament to the human spirit and the power of community.
Well said, Rick. And you look at the Great Wall of China, and it's symbolic of the tour in so many ways outside Canada. It generated awareness and hope and inspiration for so many others, because in 1985, when you left Vancouver for the States, you ended up wheeling through 33 other countries, 4 continents, and by the time you got back to Canada, your goal was $10 million for the Man in Motion World Tour. You had 174,000 roughly at that time returning to Canada. But in your book, your autobiography, and I know there's a 30th anniversary too, you mentioned that your team and you as an individual competitor, you're leaner and stronger and more determined than ever. A lot of people were saying you're back in Canada now, you can put it into cruise control, but you still had almost 14,000 kilometers to wheel. Can you talk about the reception that you received when you got back onto home turf in Newfoundland? And you mentioned going through towns in Newfoundland that had 25% unemployment rate, but were still just so generous. Can you talk about some stories once you got back to Canada?
Yeah, well, first of all, I almost didn't make it because coming out of the high of China and Asia, thinking it would be that way up the eastern seaboard of the States from Miami all the way through to Maine, it was pretty bleak, mostly because we just couldn't get the word out. And people were great to us, but there wasn't many people who knew. And I was, before we got, past Florida, I was done. I was gonna quit. And Amanda, again, she said, just think about, that Canadians are going to respond. That we're getting the word out there. We're getting time to get organized. That that it will happen. You just got to believe, keep going. Don't stop now. You'll always regret it. You'll always regret it if you just don't give it a few more weeks. And we ended up in New York and got a chance to be able to meet Michael J. Fox, and got an interview miraculously on the Today Show with Brian Gumbel on a Canadian Monday long weekend. And a whole bunch of Canadians saw that interview, and a bunch of folks got energized. And so coming back to St. John's was in itself a miracle, just being there, thanks to Amanda. And there I was being greeted by people from Newfoundland and Labrador, and just really making me feel like I was home, and that something special was starting to happen. Being there at Cape Spear, where Terry had dipped his artificial leg in the Atlantic Ocean and turned west, and getting the reception that made us all feel that it wasn't just about awareness, that it was also about generating money for a good cause. And boy, it was truly inspiring, and I'll never forget that kind of generosity of the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And it set almost like a precedent, a tone that kept building across the country like a big wave.
And there was a very emotional part of you heading west towards BC when you ended up in Thunder Bay, and you're looking up at the memorial of a good friend of yours, Terry Fox, who that's where he ended his marathon of hope. And just you looking up at that statue is just raw emotion in your eyes. And just seeing that statue, did you think about Terry a lot when you're wheeling on those long days where it might have been 70 or 80 or 90 kilometers a day? Did you carry that inspiration from Terry Fox with you?
For sure. Like Terry, as I said earlier, he's a great friend, and there were a lot of attributes that are very inspirational with Terry. And one of the greatest ones, he was one of the most determined guys I ever met, and he just gave it. And we pushed each other, And when his mom and dad gave me that little miniature version of the statue of Terry at Thunder Bay, I mean, Terry had been there as an inspiration for me to form the, the dream. He was one of many inspiring forces or vectors that helped me put it all together. And our friendship was there, and then the symbol of the statue was there in the motorhome when I'd take a rest every day, and when he'd be sitting there, finally warmed up after like hour break, and it's time to get it up for another 40 kilometers and push again, and it's like minus 20 or 30, and there he is, kind of looking at me saying, "Come on, man, like give her. You're not going to quit now." And so by the time I got to Thunder Bay, it was incredibly emotional, even to the point where not long before that, I had been forced to stop with a raging infection, and I went to the hospital, and I developed just so much fatigue and dehydration, and fortunately with antibiotics, I was able to recover after a few days of rest. But there's a fine line between pushing too much, and then being over the edge, and then too far over the edge, and I didn't know where that edge really was. It was always there's always in the back of your mind. And being so close to when Terry was forced to abandon his journey because of the recurrence of cancer, it was weighing heavy on me. And it all just came crashing in there at the statue. And I was thinking it was going to be a very personal and private moment, but it turned out there was people found out about that we were there, and of course they were there too with us. And he really was present for sure. And in many ways, from that point on, I was kind of taking my friend with me right across the country back home, because he's with you in heart and spirit, and he is even to this day, always will be.
Yeah. And you talk about that fatigue when you reach British Columbia, where you're so close to that finish line that you didn't want to overdo it or overexert yourself. And I remember just reading about you entering northern British Columbia, and it was communities like Prince George and Quesnel and Williams Lake that really stepped up to the donation plate, where there was an accumulated $500,000 between those three communities right there in northern British Columbia that just wanted to help the Man in Motion World Tour anywhere they could. What was it like wheeling through your own backyard?
It was a real source of pride for sure, to be welcomed into the Caribou, and to see that kind of response, and and into my hometown of Williams Lake. It's a fairly diverse community, and there's not a lot that really brings it together. And I was kind of like fearful of wondering, what was going to happen when I got home, and of course to see everybody come together, and and to celebrate, and to embrace the journey and the spirit and the message behind it. And as a matter of fact, Williams Lake ended up, raising the most per capita in the entire planet. So it was like unbelievable to think of that kind of wellspring of support, and definitely a great way to send me off as I came back down the home stretch. But really kind of coming full circle to where it all started. Williams Lake is where the accident happened pretty much, and where my family was, who nurtured me and gave me that sense of attitude and perspective and caring, and my teachers, mentors, and my teammates and friends. It was wonderful to be reconnected and come back there before we finished the last day. And I was just blown away by it. It was a memory I'll never forget.
So you finished the tour, and you didn't stop. And I think that's one thing that's really critical, is the tour raised $26 million, which is fantastic, especially when you consider you entered the country with 174,000. So blew your goal out of the water, because Canadians rallied behind you. And like you said, there's not much that unifies us, but that sure did, right? You and your team unified Canadians. But since then, the big thing is that I only became aware of recently, you formed a foundation, and that foundation is different in its objective from what I would say is a typical spinal cord association. You've set slightly different goals, and you've raised $300 million. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, who'd have thought? I thought I was, donating, like probably a 4-year chunk of my life in planning, execution, and wind down for something that would pay it forward, and then go back to my athletic career and try to regain my world title and see how far I could go, and eventually finish, and get into being a coach and a teacher, which is kind of where I wanted to be at the time. And little did I know, when I came back on that last day, there was this sign behind me as I broke through that 40,000-kilometer barrier, and I see it. It says "Welcome home, Rick," and above it there's this little slogan that says "The end is just the beginning." And I'm going like, "Hey, crazy marketing guy, I'm not. I'm done, man. The tour is over. Let's just start. Let's start getting to that goal I set, a couple years earlier, which is get back into my athletic career." But after I rested and detrained and wind down, I got back in the saddle and started to work out. And the first workout session, I quit halfway through. And second one, struggled through it. Third, struggled, and I just found myself completely not able to get into it, and realized that, of course, after a bit more reflection, that whole tour had changed my whole life, and I needed to be in sync with that. And it ignited in me a greater understanding of how big those two big dreams were: curing paralysis and making the world accessible and inclusive. In our tour, while obviously the awareness and the funds raised were significant, it was just a grain of need in a desert of sand, and a whole desert there of need. And it was like a long way to go, and I needed to keep moving, make it a lifelong journey. And the foundation was created. They continued to disperse money and grants, and then started to realize that if we didn't start to generate more money, and more importantly, look at solutions that would tackle big barriers, bring more people together and more resources, then we'd never really have the impact that we were all struggling for back even during the Man in Motion tour, because there were big, crazy, audacious dreams, and they needed to be energized. And we could do that if we kept repeating that cycle of barriers, big dreams, teams, resources, and keep moving forward. And for all these years, that's kind of been the engine. The foundation is presented, and it bears my name, but more importantly, it bears the spirit of looking for setting the bar higher and keep moving with new solutions to be relentlessly, as long as it possibly can, contributing to making a difference in that goal and dream.
Why did we need your organization, though? There was other organizations that were dealing with spinal cord injuries and paralysis. What made yours different? Why?
I think, well, that's the thing you have to really always ask yourself is, and people always come to me wanting to do something for charity, and I always ask them to do, first things first is to pick whatever they're doing that's got a link to their passion and their skills. And secondly, if they want it to apply to make a difference, before they do, make sure they look and see if there's an existing organization that is best suited to be able to receive that support, or whether there's a gap that you need to fill. And so that's exactly what we did. Is we looked at the field, and it was so filled with so many great individuals that were doing work, or great small organizations that were doing work in the area of spinal cord research, but they were collaborating together and looking for how we can be greater than the sum of our parts. How can we work together? And so how do we, for instance, look at a solution like a global spinal cord research center that brings together researchers and clinicians who are like spread out all over British Columbia, and put them in the same building, and then help them collaborate and work together with synergy, and make it their primary purpose. And all of a sudden, you accelerate progress. Or how do you start measuring spinal cord injury treatment with the same language and the same measurements, so you can actually tell whether a treatment is actually going to make a difference or not? Or how do you get a chance to be able to pull more research into clinical trials so that it can be actually applied by multiple centers. And how do you get people from around the world to start to speak the same language, measure the same things, and work together and form a network for collaboration? And so those are the kind of local and global barriers that were expressed by the field, and nobody was actually going after it. And so we decided to tackle that, and that's kind of how we were able to continue to make a difference and add value into a busy field. And we do the same thing on the area of accessibility and inclusion. Lots of great individual, local, national, and global organizations doing wonderful work, but we've decided to tackle some pretty big barriers, and one of them is taking a look at the built environment, the places and spaces that people live, work, learn, and play, and and try to use a common standard that could be a global standard, and then train architects, engineers, city planners, real estate owners, advocates to take that course so that they're using that same qualification, and any building that gets built by a person who's been accredited by us, uh, you can guarantee that they're going to build a building for people, and for people who have varying disabilities, and it won't be something you'll have to retrofit in the future and spend gazillions of dollars wishing you'd got it right first. And that's going to take all the energy that exists inside the hearts and minds of people with disabilities who are fighting these fires, bring it upstream and normalize it in the development industry. And lo and behold, you're going to get buildings everywhere that will be always normally built for everybody, and people with disabilities won't be left behind. What a concept! But that's a dream we're working on, and we're looking to scale that globally, and truly see that be reflected not by one man in motion, but many who buy into the same idea, and they learn the skills, the competencies, and they deliver it every day, everywhere.
Well, as a very goal-oriented individual, after the Man in Motion World Tour, it was really just moving from one substantial goal, one substantial dream to the next. And I feel that you're very fortunate to be in a position to do that after the Man in Motion World Tour came to an end, because there's studies done with marathon runners or triathletes where they spend years training for an event, and then once it's over, they slip into depression because they don't have those big goals to reach for down the road.
Yeah.
And another one that our friend Shirley Bond, who's also a friend of yours, wanted to mention, Dave has this question
Wonderful
about another
woman.
initiative.
Yeah, in the year 2000, you established the Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund. Can you let people know what is that and why were you passionate about it?
Well, I've been raised, here in British Columbia, and the outdoors, fishing and camping and all that has been really important in my life. And as a matter of fact, my accident happened coming back from a fishing trip, and fishing was a big part of my rehabilitation. And over the years, I came to realize that you can't just take from the environment. You also have to give back, and your footprint has to be lighter. And you want to do what you can. And as it turned out, most of my adult life, had been on the banks of the Fraser River, and I'd come into contact with the Fraser River white sturgeon, and these sturgeon just seemed to pop into my life. And then one day there was a big die-off of hundreds, like in '93 and '94, there were hundreds of mature broodstock, between 8 and 14 feet long, that were washing up on the shores of the lower Fraser River. And no one knew what was happening. No one knew whether the stocks were strong or weak. And I decided that I would bring a group together, and at the busiest time of my life, and just say, hey, let's settle that. Let's get a group of scientists and business folks and sport fishermen and Indigenous leaders, and come together and then find out what the population was, and then find out if there were any issues, and then use that as a baseline to go after solutions so they could recover if they were in trouble. And that conservation society, it's now been in force for over 20 years, and its success, I think, inspired the federal government to try to take a look at some of the models like that in on the West Coast for salmon, and and so they asked me to lead a Pacific Salmon endowment fund and create a society that would build leadership capacity here on the West Coast, and that led to the elevation of the Pacific Salmon Foundation, which is a major foundation focusing on salmon conservation and restoration, and they're doing amazing work. And I was proud to be part of that, early transformation and support. And I continue to express as a leader my passion and energy to care about, healthy people, an inclusive society, and a healthy planet. And I believe that, that balance is important. And I do what I can to make a difference. And sturgeon and salmon are so connected. Without salmon in the Fraser River, sturgeon wouldn't survive. And so it makes sense to bring things together and see the connections and forge that kind of collaboration. And the lessons from spinal cord research and accessibility, they translate into the environment as well, because leadership is about looking for problems and then searching for experts and solutions and like-minded people who will come together to collaborate, and the results are greater than the individual sum of the parts. And so I love expressing that every single day. I'm a proud British Columbian, and I think we've got a tremendous culture here that's growing and evolving. And why not have a smart working economy and a healthy environment, and have people be healthy and respecting each other despite their differences. So that's my value system, and love to see that translate here in BC every day the best I can.
Well, Rick, these are just all enormous undertakings, and Dave and I have talked about it on multiple occasions. We're like, how is there not been a movie made about Rick Hansen? Yeah, we're talking about maybe Ryan Reynolds would be the perfect person to play the lead role. But in addition to that, we also thought about an audiobook, because you have such a powerful story, and especially the younger generation who's really in tune with audiobooks right now. Has that been a consideration for your team and you to maybe release an audiobook narrated by yourself down the road?
It's interesting that at this time, as I've elevated from being founder and CEO of our foundation to founder, I'm at a bit of a threshold where I have a chance, while I still am very active supporting, the ongoing dream of the foundation. I get a chance to think a little bit more broadly, and maybe sitting back and figuring out ways to tell a bit of the lessons or the story coming forward without compromising the passion of believing the best work is still in front might be a real possibility. And I appreciate that thought and insight, and I'll definitely add that to my list. And we have a school program that is in every province and territory that really is free lesson plans for teachers from K to 12, so they can actually take those lesson plans and integrate them and help kids learn about the issue of disability. They can learn about having great attitudes, to see ability, possibilities, to spot barriers and be champions of change. And so maybe there's ways to perhaps address the the thought that you mentioned when we were talking earlier, that maybe there's a generation who didn't understand what the tour was all about, or maybe they see the social justice purpose today of our foundation, and in connecting the two to help them build bridges into their own passion and their ability to spot barriers and join a movement that continues at a global level, where we act locally and think globally, and ultimately we keep things moving forward until the goal is done.
On that, how much does legacy matter to you, and how do you want to be remembered? If you could say, this is how I want people to remember me, how would you set it out, if it matters?
I think, well, legacy is more about, with what time and energy you have at this period, and or what continues beyond your life, that it continues to do good work, and ultimately that hopefully there's a continued push towards changing the world, and ultimately stretching as far as you can in that direction, no matter what the time bound is for that. And if it flames out, going for the next big dream, along with his best efforts, that's for me the best legacy we could have as far as an organization is concerned. As far as my name, I've always said that my name is, I'm just a human being, a guy from Williams Lake, and if it can be a positive thing, then it's great to know. If it's not connected or relevant, then it's not necessary for it to be linked. And my hope is that if people kind of understand, the story of Rick Hansen, it would be basically that, he was a guy from Williams Lake who, from small town, who was a middle class Canadian who, basically had big challenges, and, through, grit, determination, and a lot of support from family, friends, and community, was able to keep going and find a meaningful life, and had a passion to also pay it forward, and just do the best he could with what he had. And that's the only real legacy I think that matters, and hopefully it inspires someone else on their journey as well.
Wow, great answer. And with that said, just if you were to look back at your lifetime, you used the word difference maker in a lot of your keynote speeches. And what has it been like for you as a kid who grew up in Williams Lake to meet so many difference makers throughout the world, in communities, in provinces, in countries, in continents? What has it been like to you just to meet all these difference makers throughout the world?
It's incredibly inspiring, to meet so many amazing people who are doing great things. Unfortunately, in our, kind of, media-driven world, we're so bombarded with the negative stuff and the fear-based, and it's so easy to lose faith in, in the incredible, positive spirit of humanity, and all the goodness is out there. And I feel like I'm the exact opposite. I'm like a lightning rod for receiving this, incredible plethora of goodness and inspiration and great ideas and the power of community, and I get a chance to acknowledge people who have made a difference as well. So it gives me hope, it gives me inspiration, and it's a privilege to be able to then give someone a little bit of acknowledgement and say, hey, really appreciate what you're doing, keep going, it's amazing, and then share that with others so they might also be inspired. If they can do it, so can I. And that's kind of, I think if you asked Terry if he was alive, Terry Fox would say, don't make me a hero, in this sort of elevated sense of, the essence of every human being, because, I'm just like anyone else. And if you make me something that's beyond real, out of the passion for recognizing those attributes, that you'll separate me from the everyday person, and no one will really relate. And I believe, that there's a bit of Terry Fox in everybody, because I knew him as, as a friend and as an athlete, and strengths and weaknesses. He was, he was a good athlete, but he was also stubborn, and he would get cranky, and he had a dry sense of humor, and and yet you see him in the crowd and you wouldn't pick him out. And so, hey, if he can do that, what can I do? There's so much of that in all of us, and I believe that's why he's so enduring, and I think his family would really want that to translate to that next generation of youth, because if he's superhuman, then how does that relate? But everybody has that.
I think that, this is what leads to our last question in the podcast, and we always ask the same question of every guest, but now I have to reshape it because of your answer, in that I'll say that, I think what you've accomplished is amazing, but I also do appreciate what you've said. I recognize you're just a guy and you've lived your life, but you have inspired people and you've done something inspiring. So the actions you've taken and the things you've done can inspire me, while I also appreciate and recognize that by putting you on a pedestal could make things worse for you, as you have to live to this expectation of people instead of just being able to be really irritated in traffic with whoever was driving bad.
Yeah.
But, so without saying you're putting someone else on a pedestal, aside from Terry Fox, who I think every Canadian on the planet says is an inspiring human being, who would you pick out of other Canadians that you've met that you would define as
Yeah.
inspiring?
Well, there's a few for sure, like a lot. But if I look at some of the most obscure person, is Stan Strong, the team manager of our wheelchair basketball team, who recruited me after my injury. He was a peer counselor for the BC Spinal Cord Injury Society, and he basically gave. He was injured in the 30s and wasn't supposed to survive if he had spinal cord injury back then. Instead of being in the hospital for 4 months, he was there, for basically 4 years. His first wife left him. There were no rehab centers, no opportunities, and this guy, in the early 40s, when he came back out of the hospital, still alive, carved a life for himself, and he was so resilient, and he didn't give up, and he saw hope and beauty and love in life, and didn't let his disability and pain and suffering limit him. And he inspired the heck out of me because he also was paying it forward to the next generation. And he set the gauntlet for putting that cable cars team together, that dream team where Terry and I and Eugene Reimer and Pete Calistro and so many others were there together. And Terry was inspired by him. I was inspired by him. If it wasn't for Stan, I doubt if we would have done what we did. And so nothing but kudos. And what does that represent? It's to every unsung hero, in any sport team, any volunteer organization, any parent or teacher or mentor who's just, doing their best to help out. And they never know, where the next Rick Hansen or Terry Fox, who's just looking for a little bit of hope or inspiration. And I don't mean, having to change the world, but just change their own life to keep going and have the belief that they can make a difference. And that's super important. And so Stan's, a great hero to me, huge inspiration. And I think about him all the time. And he lived to be 84 years old, and he had a great life, and he was still thinking of the next dream the day he passed away. What a mentor. And then, of course, my wife, Amanda. Without her, my life wouldn't be the way it is. We have 3 amazing daughters, 3 grandsons. They put it all in perspective, to give and receive love and to be part of a family. And that's been an incredible journey. And she's my best friend and my greatest advisor, and is always challenging me to keep growing and thinking. And I feel blessed to be on the journey with her. And then, to be honest, there's so many others, but Chris Hatfield also comes to mind because, he's another small town guy who's just a humble, competent, quiet, incredible leader, who's been the commander of the International Space Station, and, speaks Russian, and, he's been a pilot, and, and he's a humanitarian, and he's just inspiring the world, and dreams are possible for all of us. So I think we need inspiration, especially during this time, and need to come together, no matter how divided the world might be. And COVID has created I think a reflection point for all of us, and we can kind of get caught in our own self-righteous personal beliefs, but as a society, we've got to come together and sacrifice a little bit for the whole, and do our best, and navigate through tough times and support each other.
Rick, we just wanted to take a second to thank you for being a guest on the Crazy Damn Canadians podcast. And like you mentioned, we need inspiration more than ever right now in this world, in our country, in our province, in our communities. And I hope that this podcast does manifest that for others. And also, just for our listeners and our watchers, how can people support the Rick Hansen Foundation, and how can people get involved?
Yeah, first of all, I think the best thing they can do is just think about the idea of disability and move it from negative to positive. Make it part of their general awareness that there's still a lot of barriers out there. spot a barrier and get involved and try to think about removing it, because every one of us are going to have a disability of some sort in our lifetime, and it's going to get bigger with aging boomers. But also they can look us up at rickhansen.com, and they can make a donation, or they can write in to connect us with someone who's struggling, or we can they can volunteer or join an initiative that we're involved with. We're really important to keep building our team, because our best work is still in front of us.
Well, that's fantastic, Rick. And I'm going to use the word difference maker again, because we have a very strong supporter of this show. His name's Selin Alpe, and he is making a donation to the Rick Hansen Foundation today. And we also have a video of some difference makers from Northern British Columbia that wanted to share a message of hope and inspiration for you as well. So thank you again, Rick, for being our guest.
Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate it.
And I think Matt's going to play the video.
My name is Selin Alpe. I'm the proud owner of the Canadian Tire store here in Prince George. Rick Hansen is a national icon, and in my opinion, an international hero, as he has had the ability to have such a positive impact on so many people all over the world. This extraordinary man is relentless in his pursuit of creating a world that is accessible and inclusive for everyone by removing barriers for individuals with disabilities. He is one of the most authentic and driven human beings on the planet. Day in and day out, Rick lives his life by literally being the change he wants to see in the world. Along with his team at the Rick Hansen Foundation, he is dedicated to raising awareness, changing attitudes, helping create accessible spaces, and liberating the amazing potential of people with disabilities. Rick is an incredible inspiration to all of us who wish to positively affect change in our evolving world.
Hi, I'm Lynn Hall, Mayor of Prince George, and it's a real privilege for me today to be talking a little bit about Rick Hansen, what he means to me and what he means to our community, and really right across the country. And Rick for me is really the epitome of perseverance and commitment. He really has demonstrated that not only in his Man in Motion tour, his world tour in 1985, but really what he's done since then, and his philanthropic approach to things that he's done with his foundation, him helping out people with disabilities across the country. And he really has exemplified his place in, I think, in showing people what you can do and how quickly you can do things, and the meaning of a strong foundation, which really Rick has developed in his team. The thing that I remember most about Rick is during his tour, which started in 1985, is the picture of him on the Great Wall of China. And it just really resonates with me today. And as we reach really a milestone anniversary of Rick's Man in Motion tour, that really does stand out for me. And I would just like to extend my best wishes to Rick and thank him for everything that he has done. And really, as I said earlier, exemplifies commitment and perseverance.
Rick Hansen, to me, is the prime example of a hero. He has shown in 2 years, in 2 days, 2 months, and 2 days, going around the world, that adversity turned into something unbelievable, and is an example to all of us, old and young. So all the best to Rick Hansen.
Rick Hansen, to me, is the inspirational icon that we all grew up with. He was our hero that we are honored to call our own.
Thank you, Rick, for being a great Canadian hero. Thank you.
Rick Hansen, to me, is the man in motion, proving that it is truly mind over matter.
I remember in 1985, like it was yesterday, 9-year-old boy in the Prince George Coliseum, packed house, and to see you on your world tour and to see what a difference you are making and how one person can really, really change the world.
I certainly will never forget the images of Rick Hansen wheeling along the Great Wall of China. I think Rick is a true Canadian hero. Thank you for teaching us, Rick, that anything is possible.
Man in Motion was a global phenomenon, but as a young kid in the 80s, I'll never forget seeing an image of Rick Hansen just muscling up this impossible grade, and the look on his face was laser focus and ferocity. So, thank you, Rick Hansen, for demonstrating, what you can achieve with grit, willpower, and determination. Just being a fantastic example for us all, and for being an amazing, crazy damn Canadian.
Hello, Rick. I just wanted to tell you how inspired I recall I was when you did your Man in Motion tours in the 80s. Not only was it inspirational here in Canada, but the impact you made around the world, going into countries like Israel where there was conflict and creating calm and awareness. You truly are an inspiration to us all. We thank you for the courage to go out there and create awareness, but also create awareness of peace and support throughout the world. So again, Rick, totally inspired. Thank you for what you do.
Hi there, Rick. My name's Vern Motel. Like yourself, I've had some physical impairments that I've had to deal with. But I've always thought of you being very inspiring through all your being persevering, through overcoming physical challenges. And I always look at those challenges and think challenges are what make life interesting. And basically us overcoming them is what makes life meaningful. So keep doing what you're doing. I try and inspire whenever I can, and never let the feeling of disability hold me back from anything. Take care. Bye now.
Rick, I appreciate the chance to just let you know how much you inspired me initially on your ride around the world, and then subsequently just your personality. I had a short encounter with you. You came to PGSS, you wheeled through my room with a lot of students in wheelchairs and to use our washroom, and the kids talked about that encounter for months, and I still remember it. So thank you for being who you are.
Rick Hansen, your actions are the true definition of perseverance, and Rick Hansen is one radical Canadian. All my relations.
Rick, thank you for being such a hero and an inspiration to so many people all over this planet. Today, it is my pleasure to donate to you $1,000 to the Rick Hansen Foundation. Thank you so much.